Hey, Michael here. Welcome to this week's episode of the Michael Girdley Show. Had a really cool guest this week, and we talked a lot about a bunch of different subjects. Meghan Skornia is her name. She actually relocated to San Antonio a couple years ago from Austin, originally from St. Louis, and she goes into a lot of her background. We talked about a bunch of cool stuff. Believe it or not, there is a bar in San Antonio where people who left Austin go to commiserate their former city. The new 100-mile bike and hike trail that goes from San Antonio to Austin that they're working on, as well as a bunch of different urban planning, urban development, life and philosophy stuff. So really enjoyed it. Excited to share with you kind of Megan's perspective on stuff. I learned a lot, and I'm personally excited to share this one with you. So thanks so much. Megan, thanks for being here. I'm really excited for chatting with you today. Maybe a good place to get started. Tell me how you ended up being in San Antonio and kind of doing what you do. I'm excited to hear about that.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. Excited to be here today. So my name is Meghan Skornia. I am an urban planning consultant, currently based in San Antonio, Texas. How we got to San Antonio, it's kind of a classic millennial story of being priced out of Austin, Texas. I'm an urban planner. To get that job, you just go to school and get an urban planning degree. So we moved here in 2014. Here being to Central Texas area, moved to Austin, where I worked for a consulting firm that writes zoning codes, form-based codes, things like that for different communities. I was with them for a little bit and then switched over to where I'm at now, which is Asakura Robinson. Lived in Austin, and then how I ended up in San Antonio, I guess kind of towards the end of the scary part of the pandemic, I guess. So September, October 2020. We had a big life change. A dog of ours died. Our rent was going up. Our affordability, possibility of buying a house in Austin was just slipping through our fingers. So we just decided, first off, we're going to take kind of a road trip. Drove up and down California, spent a couple months doing that, put everything in storage. But then decided that we needed basically to build some equity. We kind of had added up how much we'd spent on rent in the past, the 8 years of living in Austin. It was very painful. But we wanted to keep our connections. We wanted to still be able to see our friends. I wanted to keep my business connections. We weren't really ready to leave Texas. Abbott had not put in place his draconian abortion law yet, although frankly, that would have been a major changer for us and still is. So I don't know if we would have ended up quite the same. But we're here in San Antonio. We bought a house in Dignity Hill in April of last year. So actually a year ago. So yeah, I've been here a year. And
That's great.
It's been great.
Yeah. And you're a mom now.
I am a mom. I had my son in November of last year, my first son. And so that experiencing kind of birth, pregnancy, postpartum, and as a woman in this country has been pretty radicalizing. I haven't been able to fully digest what it means for me in my life yet, because I think it means a lot. It's been a whirlwind, but my son is amazing. His name's Holden, as everyone says. He's just super cute and chill and very much what we needed.
That's awesome. And where is your partner / husband from? Is it he's from San Antonio?
Yeah, my husband he's from Nashville. We met when we were in architecture school. I was a grad student. He was an undergrad. Met there, and then we lived in Nashville for a little bit, and then moved to Austin for my job. And he's in carpentry, furniture, fabrication, remodeling, kind of that whole world.
Yeah, super interesting. Well, one of the things you touched on, and we don't have to go deep in this if you don't want to, but I've been fascinated by watching kind of like the process of like what it becoming a mom like changed to like thinking. And you kind of talked about that. Like it made you like, I think the word used was radicalized. So can you describe more like what's happening? And we could talk about something else you want, like bus routes or whatever, but it's super curious.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy because, you go your whole life trying to prevent a pregnancy, especially as a woman. The
Mhm.
onus is on us, really, to do a lot of the prevention and make sure the prevention's happening. And then you start not preventing. And, we were really, really lucky. I know we're very lucky, got pregnant very immediately. So, you kind of think that's it. And you're like, okay, well, I've done it and now I wait. But really just going through everything that can happen in a pregnancy is really intense. For example, like some of the genetic testing that comes up, it comes up midway through the pregnancy. And luckily, my son is totally fine. We did have a minor scare where there was a moment where we thought in order to protect him, we might need an out of state abortion or something like that. And it was just really the most like intensely bad I've ever felt was knowing that like there might be something wrong with him and I couldn't get care from my normal providers
Yeah.
here in Texas. So that was pretty radicalizing. And then just going through, I'm in this really cool thing. It's really cool. It's through Reddit, but it's these bumper groups. And what they do is they place you in these groups with people who are giving birth in the same month as you worldwide.
Hmm.
So there's about, 2,000 people in this chat, and we're chatting about what we're going through. We're all giving birth in November. And really just seeing how literally all the other developed countries were people were able to take off of work for their pregnancy. Whereas I was working, laying down, throwing up, really poor mental health, like just through these really awful situations in the United States. That was kind of really intense. And I don't know, they say comparison is the thief of joy. I know things are better in women for Europe and for women in Europe, places like that. But really just seeing it firsthand as women who were pregnant at the same time as me was really, really intense. And I'm lucky I work for a very women friendly company. I'm very senior there. So, I had the flexibility that they could give me and that I needed, but it was just really intense to know that we can do better and we're just not. That sucks.
Yeah. It's super interesting. Well, yeah, you talked about the ideas of like the most recent like abortion bill that we had passed here in Texas.
Mhm.
Like I guess it's so confusing to me. Like I'm so confused. Like why? I don't understand why we're doing that unless it's like it feels like we should be worrying about more important stuff. But anyway, so
Yeah,
but
and I try to think about it from like a view. I'm like, why do we want potential? Like I'm trying to think. I'm like, is this some sort of like we need to have workers thing? Like why are we
yeah.
doing this? And I haven't been able to figure that out. So let me know if you do.
I will quote another person who I happen to spend a lot of time with, but shall remain anonymous. But said person says it's actually quietly a war against women. So like it's designed to
Yeah,
subjugate, especially women of certain social strata, certain colors, that sort of stuff. Like I
yeah,
think somebody like yourself is in a situation where a law like that isn't as devastating to your potential options and to your ability to live a balanced and best life. But I think that the
sure,
argument is that it's, to some extent, a pretty aggressive thing against the poor, the under resourced and stuff like that. That is one person's interpretation of it. Which the corollary to that is it also drives this person crazy when he sees women signing up like this is a great thing for women. It's a terrible thing for women because it reduces options and the ability to kind of control what's going to happen with your body and your life. So um,
totally.
that is one opinion I have heard.
That makes
I don't
hey,
know.
that's one. That's a valid one. I that makes sense to me.
Yeah. So you talked about leaving Austin. And something you tweeted about is there's a bar in San Antonio where all the former Austinites go to be sad about leaving Austin. First of all, like, how dare you be sad about moving to San Antonio? But no, I'm just kidding. I felt sad when I moved here too. So it's
Yeah.
we we moved here in 2003, and I felt like it really took me almost a decade to feel like I was really part of the community and I had found my place. Like I was almost
Yeah.
there was a juncture where I was like, we're either moving to Southtown, which at the time was kind of the Dignity Hill of San Antonio,
Yeah.
or we are, or we're moving someplace else, going back to California. And we moved to Southtown, and
Yep.
it turned out great. But so anyway, I'm giving you some beef about that. But where's this
Hey, I
bar
get
that
it.
where do all the sad Austinites go, and why is it Olive Garden?
Um, so I will say, this is a locally owned bar by some wonderful San Antonians, with a
Yeah,
lot of really cool San Antonio specific things. I just have happened to see a lot of sad Austinites there. And I had a sibling of mine in town this weekend who lives in Dallas, but knows Austin well, and he correlated my feelings on that. But the bar is Pink Hill, right there on Broadway. And so they're just, it has an Austin vibe. A lot of people there look like they just came right down from Austin. And I feel like whenever I'm there, I end up having a conversation with someone that basically goes along the lines of, we're really, really lucky to have had options. A
yeah.
lot of people, in Austin do not. And we're financially better off for moving down here, but we miss it a lot. So Pink Hill.
Yeah, I totally dig it. Now, the funny thing is, I spend, you're talking about this bar right on Broadway in kind of the central urban core, if you call it urban, of San Antonio. I spend probably 2 hours every day within 100 yards here because my gym is right here. I had no idea there was a bar here.
Oh, nice.
Like, where's this?
Yes,
By the way,
it's great.
this may be the most Austin part of it is like, why don't you put a sign out front? Like, I want to go to the bar, but you got to put a sign out front.
They put a blinky one out like when they're open.
Yeah.
But it is a really wonderful place, highly recommended. We take our baby there, but they have a lot of, this is San Antonio, so we can't have an event without there being a market, right? So there's always
Yeah.
a lot of markets going on. A lot of food pop-ups. Yeah, it's a great little shop.
Totally dig it. So one thing I noticed about your work, and they on your bio for stuff, they asked you where you could work on a project anywhere in the world, and you listed Mexico City and Hong Kong. So I mean, I was just
Yes.
curious, like what makes for an urban planner, like, and I'm the opposite of an urban planner, like I'm an urban consumer. Like what makes like a canvas like something like that like so interesting compared to like to me, like the greatest urban planning challenge would be like Corpus Christi. Like, and if you've never,
Eh,
I don't know if you've been to Corpus
yeah.
Christi, it's not that nice. I have no listeners in Corpus Christi, by the way, because I poop on Corpus Christi a lot. But like, what is so appealing about like, someplace like Mexico City or Hong Kong for the type of work you do? Like, I guess I want to understand what's the rationale and thinking there.
Yeah, well, kind of too. So when you're an urban planner, urban planning has a long history of doing some really messed up things to minority communities. The
Yeah.
entire highway system. Let's start. So cultural competency is a really important thing for us. And so what that means is when we come into a community, if it's a community that I'm not a part of, for example, it's a Black community, something like that, we'll really try to kind of take a step back and work with, for that example, a Black firm or hire Black community members to really be the face of this project and be the drivers of this project. And so for me in Mexico City, like just knowing that I would have that approach to the project where it's not like me, the designer, walking into Mexico City, where it's me finding some cool, interesting Mexican firms and like lending support and learning from them. That's what really drove me to kind of say that about Mexico City. I mean, I'm just really fascinated by it. It's so close, been there a lot. It's like a totally different world. So just learning from people about the forces that shape that city, that live it day in and day out, I think would be really interesting to me. And then my response about Hong Kong was just what's really interesting there is, in America, we tend to work on the x-axis, it's the land and the buildings out as far as you can see.
Right.
Whereas, in Hong Kong, they work so much more on the y-axis. Y-axis, like I just remember going there and being shocked to see commercial up at 3, 4, 5, 6 stories. Whereas in the United States, commercial is ground level. That's it, because it just people aren't used to, I guess, buying things they can't see or going in
Yeah.
places they can't see. So that was just really fascinating to me. And then add in the topography of Hong Kong, the complex geopolitical situation. It just seems like one of those projects that might be all consuming, but would be super, super interesting. So,
Yeah. Well, I think so. I've been to both of those cities because I'm a world traveler and stuff. But also, actually, my wife and I love to travel, so it's true.
nice.
Um, but like the thing that will surprise people about Hong Kong, which I always kind of think about it as like Asia light. It's like if you want to it's like a light
Yes.
beer. If you're going to go to Asia, it's like like you can get around pretty well. And I remember once being like in a taxi there, and the taxi driver didn't speak English; he just spoke Cantonese, and he called his daughter to like translate for us, which was like super entertaining, like
Okay.
driving around Hong Kong. But I think the thing that would surprise people
Nice.
about Hong Kong, they know how dense it is, but like how much the policies have affected how like such a low percentage of the actual buildable land is actually built on. Like they have all that land that, because the government is doling it out a little bit at a time to preserve their revenue stream, like they actually haven't developed, even though some parts of it like go up like 80 stories right into these massive housing projects to have people. So I always found that to be a fascinating example of how like the economics of how a government gets funded can totally affect like the housing
Sure.
market and how development happens.
Absolutely. And I mean, just the amount of green space there is pretty incredible. And I mean, it's just really fascinating to see, especially, I grew up in your typical kind of middle class, privileged suburban lifestyle, just to see the ways in which people live and are totally fine. It's been really freeing for me, because I feel like the suburbs do just put such a intense pressure on like outward facades and things like that. So to really see other people living in, I don't want to quote Le Corbusier on here, but like machines for living, like they're actually using their house to live. They're not using it as a facade to show how rich or Christian they are, I think is like really, really interesting.
Yeah, totally dig it. Well, and then you see that same thing happening in Hong Kong. The other fascinating thing they do is, because you can't use your house as a showpiece for your wealth or for your values like you can in America, or even Japan or other places like that, they do it with their cars. Like, so they all buy these like ridiculous vehicles, and then they
Interesting.
get custom license plates on it. So if you're ever interested in it, go on go on the web or YouTube, and there'll be like channels that focus like on the cars and then the creative custom license plates that everybody gets to go with these like ridiculous yellow Lambos and stuff like
Nice.
that. Like it's totally fascinating, as an opportunity to kind of see how the other half like watches that human instinct to kind of show off and peacock on things, but because you can't peacock a certain way, they start peacocking a whole other way. Like the human urge is unstoppable
Sure.
in terms of that.
Yeah. So
Um,
I guess the lesson is just you're going to express that in some way, no matter what.
yeah, well, I mean, look, men are going to do men things. Being one, I will tell you that's how it works. Like we just do men things.
They
Um,
are.
so the other thing that I think Texans in general like we had a thing happen recently. So I go to a gym over by the bar actually, and there's a young guy there.
Mhm.
He comes to the gym all the time. He hangs out with us. We go get coffee afterwards, and we found out for spring break he was going to do what. Well, let me ask you, what would be the most boring thing you could imagine a 21-year-old guy, healthy and virile, doing for his senior year of spring break? What would be the most boring thing you could imagine?
Iowa. I don't know. Missouri. I'm from Missouri, so I
Close.
can say that.
Close. He was going to the northern suburbs of Houston to play golf for a week. That's what he was going to do. And me and my
Oh,
other middle-aged guy
no.
buddies found out by himself, by the way, not with anybody else. Me and my other middle-aged buddies found out about this, and literally for weeks we harangued him until he agreed to go to Mexico City for the week and go stay in a
Great.
hostel and just have a great time. And it all went great
Good.
until after spring break. He comes back and we say, dude, how was Mexico City? Like, amazing, metropolis of the world. How was it? And he said, I didn't go. And we said, what happened? his mom found out that he was going to go to Mexico City, freaked out about all the PR, and refused to give him his passport. So he went to the world's most second boring thing. He went to Vegas with a bunch of 20-year-old dudes. So anyway, so I mean, that's the thing that kind of drives me nuts about Mexico City is, number one, people don't realize if you're in South Texas, like if you want to get out of the heat for the summer, the smartest thing to do is actually get on a plane and fly an hour and a half south to Mexico City. And the weather's wonderful because they're at such high altitude. And then the second thing is just how much people have taken the kind of scare tactics in the media and like not gone to places like Guadalajara or Mexico City, or some of these other kind of San Miguel de Allende, like some of these just beautiful places that are so culturally rich and the people are great. And like, yeah, you shouldn't do stupid stuff to get yourself in trouble, but like, it's just such a missing opportunity for so many people. So anyway, that's just my soapbox about Mexico City. Like, it's great.
That's funny because the first time I went, I was quite a bit younger, and yeah, my mom was the same thing. She was very concerned, very, very concerned. But I mean, I will say I felt very safe the whole time we were in Mexico City. Every time we've gone, and I regularly feel unsafe on the streets of San Antonio. So
yeah. So we talked about that. I went to lunch with some work colleagues. Why do you think people feel unsafe on the streets of San Antonio or any American city? I don't think San Antonio is that different from other places, unless you disagree. Like, what do you think is different? Why do people feel unsafe? Why do you feel unsafe?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of a constant battle between, and so just a little bit about me. We have one vehicle in my family. It's mostly what my husband takes to work. It's a medium-sized truck. So, during the day, most of the time I walk and I take the bus, and that's pretty by choice. If we needed another car, we could get one. But it's just, so I almost feel like with my job, I know too much. I know, there are these horrific of depreciating assets, not to mention the environmental cost, the cost on the modern family. I know how unsafe vehicles are. Like, it's this massive amount of death we just accept every single year as like the way it has to be, but it doesn't. So I'm really coming at, the streets being unsafe from a pedestrian perspective. So really to me, I see two things. I see like the physical infrastructure. We just don't have, enough crosswalks, lighting, sidewalks, things like that. And then, the other one is from a street harassment perspective, I'm like constantly torn between walking down a street that is busier, but I know I'm going to be told some really messed up, awful things from speeding trucks, or a street that's less busy, but I'm a little bit worried about safety because there's not as many eyes on the street. Especially where I live in Dignity Hill, the dogs are a major issue. That's my really only beef with my neighborhood, and it's a big one, is the dog situation is pretty shocking for an American city of this size. But yeah, those are kind of the two forces I see at work with why are the streets unsafe. Just really this auto dependence is a big one.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying it's actually a lot of the safety. Well, it sounds like there's vehicles, and then there's crazy drivers, and then there's some animals.
There's that like infrastructure, and then there's like society. And the street harassment thing, it didn't bother me. It bothered me a lot early on, and then it didn't bother me. And then it bothered me a lot while I was pregnant. To be getting the amount of street harassment was pretty messed up. It bothers me now when I'm out with my son. Is it
like dudes like yelling at sexual stuff? Is that?
Yeah, it's it is. It's sexual stuff. If you want to look up, I used to run an account called ATX Street Harassment. When I lived in Austin, it is since I'm not doing it anymore. But yeah, it's just mostly sexual stuff, vast majority from white men in trucks. So that's just the way it is. Like women's bodies are seen as like out there for the taking. So sexual stuff, threatening stuff, gestures, on sometimes it'll be like a flash of a certain male body part. Pulling over in the car, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I saw you tweeted, you take the bus a lot too, right? Or you try to when it sounds like it's not that reliable. I don't take the bus. I used to take it when I lived in San Francisco. I don't here.
It works when it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works when it works. And like, the thing about transit funding, is a lot of the funding comes from ridership numbers. So it's like a chicken or the egg situation. Everyone who I'm sure works at VIA, which is our transit agency here, is very qualified and know what works well. It's just, the funding and the kind of the buy-in from the community is just, it's not quite there, especially in Texas where, having this vehicle is such a sign of like who you are and what you do and everything like that.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it's shifting more that, your generation especially, and I think we covered in the pre-show, you're millennial and I'm Gen X, so you're welcome to say okay boomer to me whenever you want. By the way, I've studied generational stuff lately, and like a number one driver for and a number one fear for boomers is they fear a loss of relevance, like they're terrified about it. And that the big problem with okay boomer for them and why it's so insulting is it's totally implies like, oh, you're irrelevant. I don't care about what you think. And that's just like, that's why like every baby boomer you talk to who's heard that okay boomer thing is like it makes their head explode. So anyway, coming soon to a Twitter thread near you will be like, do not say okay boomer to boomers.
Do you know another thing that I just realized is very dangerous to say to a boomer is to, so this is a generation who's really had, everything they want when they want it. Hyper independence from this generation, and telling them that there is a time imminently that they won't be able to drive. And then the fact that they're all living in these communities that are set up literally only for driving, like, I mean, if you tell a boomer that they're not going to be able to drive forever, it's liable to get you killed. But that's kind of a big urban planning problem that is facing this generation, is that they, are all living in these auto-centric communities, and driving an auto is not for everyone, and most especially not some elderly people. So that's going to be a big one.
So what do we do about that? Are we just screwed? Or is it just going to be Mad Max for about a 20-year period?
It might be. We build communities for walkability. It's funny because I think about in San Antonio, I think I tweeted this, but I'm like, has anybody told everyone that we can have a Pearl in every neighborhood? Yeah. Like a mixed use walkable center with apartments and shops, literally in every neighborhood if we just change the zoning. And like, I don't know if no one's been that direct with people, or if, the other sides are coming around saying, oh, apartments, there's going to be poor people, it's going to be awful, all the normal kind of arguments. But it really all comes down to the land development code. I mean, especially in places, in San Antonio and in Austin, Central Texas as a whole, United States as a whole right now. I mean, development money is there and ready to build. It's just, we're slowing it down with our development codes. Our development codes are racist and anti-women and anti-pedestrian and anti-poor and, a large variety of things. It's just kind of changing these codes that is arduous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and is it still kind of done like they do the National Fire Code and Building Code? Like there's a nationally, there's IFC, IBC. I haven't done this in like 5 years. So if I'm talking about stuff like this is the okay boomer moment, you're welcome to say it. But is it the case that there's still kind of these national things that everybody just kind of says, okay, well, here's the UCC or whatever it's going to be in terms of our code, and we're going to adopt this and then we're going to modify it a little bit? Is that the core of the problem of, or is there another way that these local building codes get set up?
Well, so we're talking about development codes. So building codes are like what you're saying, make sure that like the wall is not flammable, stuff like that.
Right.
That's a building code. A zoning code is more like what uses and what form and shapes, height, buildings you can put in different places. And those are actually, unfortunately, usually developed at the municipal level. And unfortunately, they're also usually developed with a significant amount of public input. And you think that sounds good, but the way we set up our public input over the years is to favor white landowners. So all of the policies that are set out of these engagement sessions on the land development codes favors these landowners. So, I mean, this is really everything from asking for input that like requires a computer and an internet connection, which is a privilege, asking for input at a meeting at 6 o'clock that doesn't have food or childcare. Like only so many people can make that. So there's, things that have just excluded people from this process, and then, I mean, going back even further, we're talking about, actual red lighting, actual deed restrictions that say, African Americans cannot live in this home. Really, it's just been like a layering of these oppressive systems, and they all are locally developed for each city. And like, for example, if you go out into the county, I'm talking more rural situations, but like counties don't have zoning codes and things like that. So it's mostly the cities that you're seeing that are developing these, driving these, and restricting this kind of flow of development.
Yeah. What is this? Is this one of the situations where San Antonio is kind of a rarity in Texas, where it's this big single amoeba city compared to Austin, let's say Dallas. Dallas is a great example, right? Where you have Dallas city limits itself, and Dallas city government is relatively small, and then you end up having this total fragmentation of the governments around the rest of kind of, especially North Dallas and even South. Right? You have Hutchins, Little Elm, Waxahachie, all these different cities up there, and they each get to kind of not screw up their zoning codes. Is this one of the situations where, kind of the Austin and San Antonio model where we have this one giant city that does most of our urban zoning? Like, are we getting hurt by that? Is that how you would think about it? Or is it better to have the more kind of fragmented, either Houston or Dallas model where they have a bunch of little municipalities?
That's a good question. In Texas, a lot of times, like, let's look at Alamo Heights, for example. That
I
was
live there.
really
Let's
formed
don't.
because So, Alamo Heights is its own city. And and a lot of these, you'll see these kind of wealthy enclaves that want to become their own municipality. And that's really so that they can have control over their own rules and, make rules that make sense for their tax base. Has that specifically been used over time as a tool for segregation? Absolutely, it has. Is there anything inherently wrong with doing that if it works for your community? I don't necessarily think so. I just think it's the way it's been used in America has been very, very exclusive. And that said, I will say, like, just from a delivery of services, delivery of infrastructure perspective, like Alamo Heights, if it was not as wealthy as it is, they would have a lot of hardship funding, infrastructure, roads, streets, services, things like that. And so a good example of where this can be a problem, I think, comes from actually where I'm from in St. Louis. And so there, the city and the county are separated. And, through decades and decades of racist zoning policies, white flight, things like that, a vast, vast majority of the wealth lives out in the county, pays taxes to St. Louis County, and is very against a merger of the city and the county. And the city of St. Louis, where, the people who have the means drive in once a week for a Cardinals game and then drive right back out, right. The city is struggling. And so, losing population by the tens of thousands every year. And so while the idea is not inherently bad, I think you can see by my examples, it's just really been used as a very bad tool.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know, San Antonio, Alamo Heights is like the kind of the one inner city. Well, it's one of three little inner cities that we have that are their own little cities, and they're like, well, it's where I grew up. It's like where the privileged grew up. So, being a privileged person, I'm not afraid to admit where I'm from.
Yes, definitely.
It's really interesting. You talked about this problem where you end up with governments almost always like the fundamental problem is they don't think about and aren't optimized for the residents they should be trying to bring in. They end up optimizing for protecting the interest of the existing folks, and that could be bad for everybody. And I think that's kind of, if people ask kind of what my challenge is for San Antonio, is like we keep optimizing more and more for parents, people below the poverty line. Like we do a lot for that, for car lovers, for retirees, and for military people. But people that want to live like the life that you were living prior to kind of becoming a parent, I'm being totally presumptive that has changed your life radically. But the people who want to live that life, like be mobile, live on a bike, not own a car, like, work in high growth kind of environments, like San Antonio has just for decades just decided not to do anything to try to retain or attract those people. And it's proven like it's pretty challenging for me. Like I don't try to recruit under 30 single people to San Antonio anymore because I know I can't keep them here. Like they never stay. But if somebody's like a parent, they'll totally stay. They think this place is great, which it is.
Well, and like, and that's what, we were up the road living in, 490 square feet in the middle of the city and wanting to have a kid. And, it just wasn't going to pencil. But, San Antonio was a good place for us where we can park it for a few years, get relatively affordable childcare, grow some equity, things like that. So I totally agree. I have a good friend of mine who is in the low 30s dating pool, and she is struggling. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Oh, she's here in San Antonio?
Yes, she is. So
yeah.
Do you know anyone, send it my way, but she's
I mean, the funny thing is I know a lot of desirable 30-something single women in San Antonio, much fewer men. So it's a challenge. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's one of those things where people were like, used to get invited to like the, hey, come on and we're going to talk about how to fix the community meetings. I don't go to those anymore, by the way. Like this is me. I just keep my blinders on. But they would be like, what do you mean you can't keep 20 somethings here who are single? I was like, open up Tinder. Go ahead. Yeah. Open up Tinder, sign up for an account, come back in a half an hour. Let me know. And then go pick another, anywhere else, go Dallas, Houston, Waco. I don't care. Just compare their Tinder to our Tinder and let me know if you still want to stay here. Let me know. And
it's unfortunate. And like, I feel like a lot of, and I'm saying what she tells me and a few other single friends, but it seems like a lot of what's left are, unfortunately men who maybe haven't been to therapy yet. And so, it's not, it's not an unfixable problem, but it's just, they need a little work. And at this point, a lot of us, I mean, I'm lucky that, I'm married to a great man who does a lot of inner work on himself. But like a lot of men, it's just been so long that they've been set in these ways. And, and like we as women, we've been dating so long, and like dealing with all this men BS that like the thought of then trying to date one and convince them to go to therapy is just like, it's like, I'd rather stay home. So I think that's kind of the general feeling.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not an expert in this. I've been married for however many 20 years. Like, when I was dating, like people still put out personal ads in the newspaper. That's how long ago. I was dating.
See, that seems really classic and nice.
I did put a personal ad in a San Francisco newspaper once when I was there, and I put it in the men seeking women stuff because I was like, well, let's just try it. What could go wrong? And all I got were phone messages from men, like just hundreds of them. I was like, this is not working. This is not
San Francisco for you.
Yes. That's San Francisco is not a great place to be a straight single person, especially a straight single man. Like it's pretty rough. So in retrospect, New York and other places have better dating options. Which, by the way, the last two young men I recruited here, guess where they're moving this weekend? Like they moved to Austin first, and they're like, "Yeah, we want to go see the bigger world," and they're going to New York. It's like, well, can't really blame them. That sounds really smart. I'll come visit, and I will be in bed by 10 because I'm not getting in trouble. That's just the way it's supposed to work.
Exactly.
Super cool. Well, I mean, I think it's so admirable, like that you've moved here despite not really having family here, and I can tell you actually care about San Antonio. So thank you, thank you for caring about San Antonio. It's super admirable, and I think the temptation when two people that care about a place like we seem to is you can get into some very negative stuff. So I just want to say, like, San Antonio's got more
Sure.
positives than negatives as far as I'm concerned.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. San Antonio, yes, it has issues. We touched on a few of them, but I will say that, you said that not having family here, and that's something that we're just really lucky to have been like embraced by a couple really good friends here. And like,
mhm.
I mean, a lot of people, like you say, are just shocked that we're down here with a kid without family because it is such a big family culture. Whereas, we've been on our own forever. We're fine. We kind of like it. But I mean, just the welcoming of the city has been really incredible. The cultural richness. I mean, like I said, and I think my tweet, I was like, I cannot believe I've been sitting up there in Austin for this whole time, not knowing this super complex, rich culture that exists in San Antonio. So it is
Yeah.
definitely on the up and up, and the energy is on the way. So
Yeah. Well,
on
I
the way.
actually, in my prep for today's chat, I quoted that. So thank you for knocking that one out for me. I was like, oh, that's
Good.
great.
Good.
Um, so I do want to talk about something fun, and maybe you don't know anything about this, but you retweeted that there's this Great Springs project that's going from Austin to San
Yeah.
Antonio. So for those
Yeah.
of you listening on the internet or whatever, like the two cities are like 80 miles apart. So they're kind of like Dallas, Fort Worth, with Twin Cities kind of in that nature, except Dallas and Fort Worth are much closer. They're like 35, 40 miles apart, and we're like
Mhm.
almost 80. So they're building this 100-mile nonstop trail from San Antonio to Austin. So I'm excited about this. I know it's not going to be ready for like a decade. Hopefully, I'll still be alive when it's done. But what do you know anything about it?
Yeah, I do. So, a lot of my colleagues over the years have worked on this project. The new plan was just released, which kind of shows the routing, which is super exciting. Going back to like kind of how this came to be is really interesting. So, I don't know if you've ever like turned off all the labels on a Google map on a satellite and just zoomed out. Um, if you look, you can kind of see the edge of where that Balcones escarpment kind of comes up like a curve from San Antonio to Austin
Mm-hmm.
there. And then, all of the springs that come out of it, our beloved springs, San Pedro down here in San Antonio, Barton in Austin, Comal, San Marcos, all of those. So what's really interesting is like, your first thought is then you turn the labels back on and you're like, well, why did they build a highway on top of this incredibly environmentally sensitive area?
Right.
And it's because, this is the path that people have used for years. And that was a country road and then it was an interstate. And, you know how it goes. But I'm really excited about it because I feel like we're getting back to that classic use of that escarpment kind of move geologically. And we're just, really highlighting those springs. And then, I have a fantasy where one day the interstates are no more and we're all riding on trains. I take the train to Austin quite a bit, and you go right along that path and you go over all of these beautiful swimming holes and springs. So I'm really excited about it. Any other mode besides a car, I get pumped about. I think it's also one of the few places where in this state, conservative people and liberal people can really find some common ground. Is it perfect? Is it a match made in heaven? No. But I think in a lot of ways, as we drift further and further apart, it is one of those core values that is important to focus on. So I think it's a great project, has a lot of potential.
Yeah, dig it. Well, actually, so part of, I mountain bike a lot. So one of the local parks, McAllister Park here,
Oh,
I
nice.
think they're going to take part. It's going to start, actually, it looks like right somewhere in there, right near my house. So I could actually like bike from my house to this park to Austin,
Cool.
assuming 100 miles. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're going to, hopefully they start paving it. That does sound really awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to do a through hike and then, take the train back or something. Like, it's such a beautiful area. And like I said, seeing it from a train, I'd encourage everybody to do that. If you haven't, it's quite nice.
So tell me about taking the train from San Antonio to Austin.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah,
fun? Like, how does it? What's the
it
pluses and minuses?
is. So, in the United States, Amtrak, for the most part, has to share rail, and especially in Texas, has to share physical infrastructure with freight. So unfortunately, that means, as anyone who's taken Amtrak knows, delays, delays, delays. But because the line originates here in San Antonio and heads north, if you take it from San Antonio to Austin, it's almost always on time. Taking it back down the other way from Austin to San Antonio, that line originates in St. Louis. So it's often delayed by like 5, 7, 12 hours, like a bonkers amount.
Wow.
So what I do is, like, for work, I'm working on Project Connect pretty heavily, and have other work in Austin. So normally I'll take the 7 a.m. Out of San Antonio. I live right by the station, which is super convenient. Take it north. It takes about an hour and a half, catch up on emails, sleep, whatever you need to do. Get off in downtown Austin about 9:30. And then normally to get back, then in that case, I'll either take a megabus if it's a good timing, or I'll take Hitch, which is kind of like Uber, but between cities. So, you're piecing together a few things, but it's just really beautiful. It's such a relaxing ride. You see all the springs, and then the view coming into downtown Austin over the river is just like none other. It's gorgeous.
So, so I took Megabus, and like the last couple times I did it, like the air conditioner didn't work. Like we took it to Houston once, and like I was just
Yeah.
like, this is the worst. I'm gonna
Nope.
go full baby boomer and just drive myself. So,
Well, and this is the plug, because Vaughn Lane is amazing, and that's like a business class bus. But they do not run Austin to San Antonio, despite
right.
my incessant begging. So if you want to beg them too, I would very much appreciate it.
Actually, when I was spending a lot more time up in Austin, which by the way, I decided like, hey, like I haven't been to Austin probably in 3 years, just because I decided I don't want to go
Oh,
there
wow.
anymore. Like I just don't like it. I would rather fly to LA than, go to Austin.
That's fair.
Or I spend more time in Dallas, frankly. So, but one of the business ideas I wanted to do was actually before any of the bus services came along, I wanted to start like a shuttle bus that ran from Geekdom, where you are, downtown San Antonio, out to 1604 and 35. So the Live Oak Mall, Live Oak, yeah, and then stop on South Congress, and then at the Capitol, and it just got bucketed to the ideas of like things I never really projects I didn't really want to work on because I didn't want to go to Austin as much anymore.
Yeah.
So super
I get
cool.
it.
So one thing you've talked about, like and it's in your kind of bio stuff, like you talk about people understanding the reality of our housing crisis. So like what sort of things is wrong or misconceptions, like in the common narrative? Like how are people talking about the housing crisis? I mean, I hear about the affordability crisis and stuff, but like what aspects of that do people typically get wrong, from your perspective as an urban planner?
Yeah. I mean, and this is a big one, like the idea that stopping development in your neighborhood will keep prices stable.
Yeah.
Is just, I mean, economically not going to happen in the United States.
So why do they think that? Like this is like typical California
I
like
don't know.
stuff, right? Like, do they not
it's
teach
typical everywhere
economics and
stuff,
supply
really.
demand?
And it's crazy because, I see people who are fully millennial, my generation, card carrying millennials, and they, are the same way. And I know that they understand supply and demand. It's just such an emotional thing. And, people, people, I think, have a really hard problem really tough time looking at the problem from a bit higher level, because they see, okay, there's this single parcel in my neighborhood. And if we knock down a house where somebody's paying, $800 in rent for that, and replace it with something that's, renting 4 units for 1,200 or whatever it is, they're going to be priced out.
Yeah.
Yes, they are, but we are adding units to the overall equation, which will only bring down prices. And I don't know if you find out why people can't, like, while regular, like, smart people can't grasp that, like, please let me know. I mean, I know that said, like in Austin, we see a lot of heartache around naturally affordable housing, which is, your older apartment complexes, especially over off like Riverside and Pleasant Valley. That's some of the like last remaining affordable to regular working people housing in Austin. It's in sometimes pretty rough shape. And so while, we all know that in theory, getting rid of that housing and putting in some high rise will add capacity to the overall market, you are taking away, what is some of the last truly affordable housing in downtown Austin. So when it's coming from a community that lives in those apartments and they're saying you're taking away my home, I'm very sympathetic and I want to make that work. When it's coming from a white homeowner who doesn't want apartments next door or down the
Right.
street or anything like that, I have like zero sympathy for that, because you're already on the upper end of the economic spectrum. You're a landowner, and then you're going to prevent other people from having a place to live. Like that's just kind of unexcusable to me.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's two different ways to look at it. And then like what you see in Austin, is you have, people who don't want apartments, who want to preserve their land values, and they're like co-opting this, like what is a very, very like kind of working class fight is to protect naturally occurring affordable housing, but they'll co-opt it for themselves to preserve their property values. Like it's a big, big, nasty mess.
Yeah. Well, so I go on Twitter sometimes, and like the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people there that are using that kind of argument, like the argument they'll make is that, oh, if you allow somebody to tear down affordable housing or to build more density houses. So let's say there's 5 units there that are affordable, and you allow somebody to tear that down and replace it with 12 units. Well, the developers are responding to, let's say in the Bay Area, they're responding to the incentives that they're given and the constraints that they're given, which is they can only build up so high. They have to provide a certain number of parking spaces, and they're only given so much land, and they're going to pay a fixed amount of fees no matter how much the units cost. So, I think typically you would see these people being like, well, if you demolish these like, rent controlled or naturally affordable housing, they get replaced by quote unquote luxury or market things. And, I think you've talked about earlier in this podcast, like how the building development codes are so screwed up and the zoning codes are so screwed up that of course they are. Like, of course the developers are doing that, because that's just so you can't just fix it by saying, oh, we're going to upzone everything, or we're going to not protect this naturally affordable stuff. You got to fix all the stuff around it. And humorously enough, and I want you to tell me if I'm wrong with this, but I'm in a special Twitter group for San Antonio people, and somebody asked, like, what would be the number one thing you would change about San Antonio? And I said I would remove all minimum parking requirements from the development code. So I'm curious, do you think that's the stupidest thing you've ever heard?
No, I think that is absolutely fantastic. You are seeing, really progressive cities do that everywhere. There's a big push to do it in Austin. I don't know if you've been to downtown Austin. Well, you said you haven't, but
I drive through it. Just keep going to Dallas.
Then you do see. So you do see, but everything that's new in downtown Austin has, like a 15-story parking podium.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And we're building buildings that are supposed to last like 100+ years. We're not going to be driving cars in 100+ years. We're already seeing it becoming prohibitively expensive for a vast majority of like people who need them. And it's just really, how much are we going to let personal budgets go to this depreciating asset is kind of crazy. But I mean, yes, short answer, yes, I think removing those is a major step and would go a long way. And I mean, people don't realize that removing these parking minimums will drop prices, because those parking spaces that have to be provided by developers are often adding so much rent costs, so much for sale costs. I mean, it's really kind of bonkers.
Yeah. Well, it's I used to live in Southtown here, and it's it surprised me how much, and that's kind of a near it was actually a suburban environment in the inner city core, and everybody would talk about it like it's urban. I was like, dude, there's single family homes with driveways and lawns. This is a suburban environment. It's just historic, and it just amazed me how much the local kind of landed gentry of like, and I don't mean this in the I'm going to say this in the meanest way possible, I guess. The old white folks there were just like, what do you mean somebody's going to park in front of my house? And it's like, no, you live in the urban core. This is the way it's supposed to be. Like, get your ass out and walk. Like, that's what you signed up for. It's not the Dominion. Move out to the Dominion if you want that, which is a upscale fancy neighborhood here in San Antonio that all the Spurs live in. So
well, and like the other thing is like what makes those people think that they own the public right of way? I mean, that's kind of where I am like, who told you that? Because they were mistaken.
Yeah, I'm so excited for our future millennial overlords to come in and take over. You guys are going to be great. It's just going to be great.
I'm ready for Gen Z. I will take a Gen Z boss any day. They've got it figured out. They don't take shit. I'm like, just tell me what to do. I'll be your weapon.
So I've got a Gen Z thread coming up too. But so two crazy things. Great. So let me make sure I have the dates for Gen Z right, because my kids are Gen Z years. So my kids
I just found out my son is Generation Alpha, which is interesting. So
yes.
Okay.
So here's two fascinating things about Gen Z. Number one, they are the first generation to see their parents as friends almost exclusively. So I was getting this talk about generations. So my kids were born in 2006, 2009. So they are frankly Gen Z. So they're the first ones to see us because they have Gen X parents a lot of times, right? Like us. So they see, and we listen, we value their opinion. We treat them as peers. They've been spoken to as adults ever since they were little kids. So they're the first generation to treat their parents like friends. So I'm listening to this like generationalist, I guess, person who studies generations. And she goes, okay, how many of you have teenagers? I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, teenage kids. Yeah, 12 and 16. And she goes, do they raid your closet and wear your clothes? I was like, yes. Well, they just take my stuff. Like it's just like, if it fits, they're wearing it. And she's like, that's because they're the first generation to see you as a friend. Like you're a peer, you're a buddy.
Cool.
It's fascinating. The second thing is
a lot. That makes me really happy.
I guess so, but what clothes am I gonna wear? So anyway, the second thing that they do is if they don't see the utility in learning something, they will just refuse to do it absolutely. Whereas like in my generation or millennial generation, that was somewhat a minority opinion. This group, like it's almost universal. They're like, I don't need to know 19th century French literature. I'm not studying it. I'm going to get a 71 and pass and barely, and that's just the way it's going to be. None of this matters to my future. Like, so those are the two kind of fascinating Gen Z type things. So good luck with that.
I love that.
Well, hopefully by the time they're in charge, I'm dead. So we'll see what happens.
I love that. And part of me feels a little bit Gen Z sometimes. Like we were talking about that. I'm in this women's kind of, financial literacy investment group. And, a lot of us who are moms are talking about, well, do we start a 529 or do we start a custodial brokerage for our new babies? Because a lot of us are seeing where, our education, it didn't pencil. The amount of student loans I have for the amount I'm getting paid, it could have gone either way. I probably would have been fine had I just not gone to college and like figured it out. And so, that's a big conversation that a lot of us are having is like, well, do we fully fund these 529s or do we assume our kids might decide that it's not a great investment to go to college? And that's just really it's kind of sad, but I think it's also somewhat realistic. As we're seeing this student loan crisis balloon and balloon and balloon and, stagnated wages, rising housing costs and things like that. So it's really interesting to hear about Gen Z. And I kind of like that because, I feel really strongly that the, U.S. kind of education system is making workers, not necessarily thinkers. And, I got a lot of flack for having that attitude in my own education. So I'm glad to hear I like that about them.
Well, my kids' 529s are fully funded, so we'll see what they do with it. Maybe they'll buy Dad a Lambo. Dad needs a Lambo. So one thing I did want to ask, and then we're coming up on an hour, so I know I got to let you go. But
sure, you're fine.
So how is the world of urban planning thinking about like the evolution of technology, right? So like you had kind of, I think like 1.0 coming along of like the Uber, Lyft of the world, and to some extent those just kind of supplanted the old taxi scheme and made them more useful. but like it seems pretty soon that we're going to have, some sort of self-driving car. Like you're going to have self-driving smart buses, flying taxis, the quadcopters that can put 3 people in and fly you someplace. Like those are on the horizon,
Hmm.
flown or not. You're going to have smart garages as part of that. Like all this kind of more intelligent street infrastructure. Like, how do you guys like think about that in the context of, you know, planning for today and then thinking about it tomorrow? Like, I'm curious how much
Yeah.
reality you guys think there is there.
Well, it's really interesting because, in the things you just listed, a lot of them are assuming people have money for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working in communities where people can't even, we're getting to the point where gas is just rising and rising and rising. The cost of owning a car is rising and rising. They're having to move further out to qualify. So, like, self-driving cars don't really solve any problems. Like the infrastructure for that is just still, massively expensive for the number of people it serves. So really a lot of us are just kind of like, yeah, like tech is great and we'll use it where we can, but like looking to our, to Europe and things like that, and even to Asia where, they're on the forefront of technology and they haven't figured out anything better than a train. Because a train moves the largest amount of people with the smallest amount of infrastructure investment. So, so we're kind of like, this is exciting. And, a lot of things, micromobility, I think is really going to change, continue. We're going to see changes related to that. But a lot of us, see the self-driving car and like the boring company and like stuff like that as just kind of like a dude idea that like isn't really grounded in the reality of how things get done.
Hmm.
Because like, I mean, think about it. You're still going to be sitting in traffic in your self-driving car. Um, doesn't really fix that.
Yeah.
So so like I think we're very interested in a way, but I think we are also facing a reckoning with the private vehicles, and I think that we're seeing a little bit of that now. I think if we charged people what they actually owe for gas, if they actually owe for road infrastructure, if we start doing that, we'll see that much more quickly. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of back to the basics in some ways.
Yeah.
I will say we do look to Asia a lot. We look to Asia, we look to Europe, what people who are really, really experienced in moving people around do and kind of follow their lead.
Yeah. Well, it all ties together, right? You have to think about the transit infrastructure. You have to think about density of living, like we to go back to like the bus system challenges here. Like we've almost, in my opinion, given San Antonio's bus system like almost an impossible job to do, right? It's like, oh, you're supposed to like
Hmm.
give this high density transit thing, but you're supposed to do it in suburban neighborhoods with freeways where cars get,
Right.
primacy on everything. And it's just like it just kind of blows my mind that we don't think more deeply about that stuff. But then I look at all the vested interests trying to protect their vested interests, and it's like, oh, okay, well that all makes sense again. I totally take this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, no wonder what no one rides via. Like, I mean, we make the stops are super hot, they don't have a lot of funding for a lot of the things they need. And like the land use and the transportation are just tied together so heavily. That's why, I'm working on Project Connect in Austin. And that's why it is like really such a comprehensive package, the way that bond was written, because it has so much funding for the land use that are adjacent to the new transit that's going in. Is like you have to have kind of that symbiotic circular relationship for them both to be successful, the land use and the transit, or it's just going to be a train to nowhere.
Yeah.
So again, that's why I think that bond package was like really super innovative, especially when you're talking about, building transit from scratch in a Texas city. So yeah, just really making sure those land use and transit go together.
Something we're really missing the boat on in San Antonio. So maybe future politicians will get it. We'll
It
see.
is.
So
Maybe.
we'll see. Well, when I vote for you for mayor, it'll be great.
Hey, I'm private sector all the way. I'm too loud mouth for a public office. So
Count on it. Count on it. All right, Megan, thank you so much for doing this. It was really
yeah,
nice to get
this
to
was
know you,
fun.
and I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Yeah, I did. Keep in touch. Thank you all.